Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. Carasoft Technology would like to welcome you to our ServiceNow Federal Tech Talk, Best Defense is a Great Offense, Integrating Vulnerability Response and Continuous Authorization Monitoring with ServiceNow. Before we get started, I would like to quickly go over a few housekeeping items. Please note that all lines have been muted to reduce any kind of background noise during the presentation. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please use the Q&A feature on the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to answer by the end of the presentation or follow up with you offline. This webinar is being recorded and a copy will be emailed to you. Just to tell you a little bit about Carasoft, we are a trusted government IT solutions provider supporting public sector organizations across federal, state, and local government agencies, including education and healthcare markets. At this time, I'd like to hand the floor over to our speakers. Scott, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Scott Havlack, and I'm an advisory solution consultant for security operations for ServiceNow. Joining me today is my colleague, Todd Huber, who's also an advisory solution consultant for our risk management solution portfolio. The topic of today's webinar is automating the RMF process with continuous authorization and monitoring and vulnerability response. And the goal of this webinar is to show you how you can do so to achieve and defend your ATO with ServiceNow. Before we get started, it is possible that we may discuss some capabilities today that are not immediately available in the product. So we want to put up a disclaimer here, a safe harbor notice, and just say that if we do happen to get into capabilities that don't currently exist in the products today, that you shouldn't make any buying decisions based off of this. And we have no obligation to deliver on anything that we may cover today that's not in the product. So the use case that we're going to cover today is an important use case for federal agencies. And it's one of our better together use cases that we have across our platform of solutions. For us, better together means, we have multiple solutions that work together that achieve, better outcomes than going with point products and trying to do it through manual process. And we'll talk about how we do that today. The three solutions that we'll cover today are our ITOM solution, which is at kind of the heart of everything that we do here at ServiceNow. It feeds our CMDB and provides all the information about, people, process, and technologies within your organization. Then we're going to talk specifically about the IRM portfolio in our continuous authorization and monitoring solution specifically. And we'll talk about how you can automate your RMF process from end to end. And Todd will go through the details of that and walk you through the steps there. And then I will show you how you can do automated testing and tie that into continuous authorization and monitoring with the vulnerability response solution, as well as our configuration compliance capability that's a part of vulnerability response. And with that said, I'll go ahead and turn it over to my colleague, Todd, who's going to do a quick overview on continuous authorization and monitoring.
Great. Thank you very much, Scott. Appreciate the introduction. Looking forward to our discussion here this afternoon. Could you progress to the next slide, please? Thank you. So today we'll be talking about continuous authorization and monitoring, or CAM, moving forward as the abbreviation. And in the graphic we're looking at now, that can be found in the purple column in the middle of the screen. CAM is technically an accelerator, so it leverages data and capabilities from all of the IRM solutions that you see on the screen now, as well as other ServiceNow solutions and any data, such as SecOps and any data that's in the ServiceNow CMDB. When it comes to the risk management framework, RMF is risk management itself. So when we're going to leverage capabilities from the initial 3 GRC solutions, policy and compliance management, risk management, and audit management, CAM is going to lean heavily on policy and compliance and audit for implementing the controls, documenting the controls, and then using audit management for testing the controls. When IRM was initially released, give or take 10 years ago at this point, it was initially called GRC, included those 3 solutions in the green columns. But since then, GRC has expanded into integrated risk management when we added in additional capabilities such as business continuity management, and the capabilities there line up directly with the requirements in the CP, or contingency planning control family, in RMF. In addition to that, we also offer third-party risk management, and the capabilities within that solution line up directly with the new supply chain risk management control family requirements. And lastly, privacy, which lines up directly with the requirements in the PT control family. In addition to these IRM capabilities, we're, like I said earlier, we're also able to leverage additional data in the CMDB from solutions like SecOps, and access all of that through that modern employee experience through interfaces such as the Service Portal, Employee Center, and the new modern UI. Next slide, please. So the last slide, we identified the IRM capabilities and the different solutions that we offer. This slide, we tie those to the actual use cases in the federal environment. Across the top of the screen, we see the individual solutions that are offered, and below those, the different use cases that we address, such as OMB A123, internal and external audits. Today, we'll be talking about what's on the bottom half of the screen in the lower left box, continuous authorization and monitoring. We're not going to get into the other solutions, although we did mention they are integrated with CAM. So whenever data is needed from those tables to help document controls, monitor for control compliance, that is all available on the same platform. CAM itself is a full end-to-end RMF solution, from all the way from boundary creation and maintenance to package creation, taking an authorization package through all 7 RMF steps, accomplishing all 56 RMF tasks along the way, stopping off at step 4 for the assessment, which we leverage the capabilities in audit management, and then get the ATO and eventually progress to the point of continuous monitoring, where our focus is today. Next slide, please, Scott. When ServiceNow first took a look at the risk management framework, we saw a lot of workflows, which is beneficial with ServiceNow being a workflow platform software solution provider. And we're able to leverage workflows and automation within the platform to accomplish the entire RMF process, and leverage all of the capabilities within the platform, such as the CMDB, performance analytics for reporting, be it the ability to tailor reports to the individual audiences that the different agencies have to report up to. And we also provide all of the controls for both Rev 4 and Rev 5 out of the box, as well as the assessment procedures for Rev 5. All of the control mapping is performed out of the box, and we also provide full control inheritance, including full inheritance, hybrid inheritance, and offering up common control providers, as well as monitoring POAMs for continuous monitoring, and all of the artifact generation that needs to take place to put together the ATO package. There are enhancements on the roadmap, especially in the next release, which is coming up in August. And this is one of the forward-looking statements Scott mentioned earlier, there are additional reports that are on the roadmap to be released for the security assessment report and the POAM report, and eventually the capability to generate these, not only the templates, but also the report themselves in Word files as opposed to PDFs in the HTML template builder. That is also on the roadmap. Next slide, please, Scott. So here's how we identify how we're able to pull all of that information into one single platform. Traditionally, when organizations take on the RMF use case, they're using point solutions which are designed specifically to create boundaries and packages, but don't necessarily have the ability to integrate with third-party tools, pull in that additional information, have configurable workflows to help drive these complex processes through to fruition. And that's where ServiceNow excels, being that CAM is installed on the ServiceNow platform and has access to all that data, especially in terms of continuous monitoring. That's very powerful. Not having to go to separate teams or different tools, request different reports, having all that data in one specific place has been very beneficial for our customers. Next slide, please, Scott. Here we have some anonymized, sanitized data from some business value analyses that we have performed with customers that have implemented CAM. The federal customer base is left off of this, but these are some of the metrics that we have captured. I'm not going to go through each and every one of those, but needless to say, the workflows and the automation that we leverage in CAM have helped our customers get to the ATO much faster and enable them to perform continuous monitoring capabilities they would not have been able to perform otherwise. With that, I'm going to pass it back to Scott. Thank you.
Okay, so as Todd mentioned, there's a tremendous amount of efficiency gains that one can achieve when you automate the control testing and the vulnerability management process, and along with the continuous authorization and monitoring activities. When we initially encounter customers for the first time, we typically find them in a state, as you see on the screen here. They've pretty much done a decent job of automating the scanner running and generating the output. The output is then typically going to be a CSV that's put into a spreadsheet. And that's where the manual effort really starts. And that's where most folks experience quite a bit of inefficiency with the process, because everything from here on out is manual. And that starts with adding context to your vulnerabilities from your assets, and then managing the process once you do that around assigning a risk value, assigning it to individuals to remediate, giving them mechanisms to manage the remediation process, whichever direction that takes them in, and ultimately closing out the tickets. And what we typically find is through these inefficiencies, that the mean time to respond or mean time to remediate vulnerabilities is measured in weeks or even months in many cases. And so what we've built in ServiceNow is a end-to-end automated solution that allows you to manage the entire process. And it starts with integrating your vulnerability scanner, which if you're in the federal government is most likely going to be ACAS, which is based off of Tenable, but it could be Qualys, it could be Rapid7, it could be other types of scanning solutions we'll talk about here in just a few minutes. Then you're going to basically leverage the automation in the platform, starting with the CMDB to assign risk. And that risk can be based on things like it's part of a FISMA boundary that you're tracking. It could be a critical function within your, the mission in the organization. It could have an exploit available versus not. That can obviously raise the priority. And then we also give you, and I'll show you this, some out-of-the-box content from NVD and CWE and the CVEs and such to manage this. Once you do that automatic assignment, then you're going to want automatic prioritization and enrichment. You're going to want to assign those vulnerabilities. That's step 4. And we offer AI and predictive intelligence to help you with that. Step 3 is actually, you're going to group the vulnerabilities and then assign them. And then you're going to begin the workflow process. And this is where you transition to the remediation effort. And the remediation effort's ultimately either going to address the vulnerability or the configuration issue. That may involve creating a change request. It could involve pushing out a patch if a patch is available and you've set up the integration with BigFix, Tanium, or SCCM. Or it could require an exception and ultimately a POAM. And that's what we're going to show today, all 3 of those steps there, and that would cover 5, 6, and then 7. And then ultimately the scanner can come back and you can launch a rescan from ServiceNow and verify that the vulnerability is resolved and then give you a mechanism to then report on that. And again, all doing this automated in an end-to-end process so that after you implement ServiceNow, you now have a fully automated end-to-end state, and now you're measuring your mean time to respond in a matter of hours or days as opposed to weeks or months. So with that said, I will go ahead. Oh, actually, one more slide. On the configuration compliance. So in our world, vulnerability scanning looks for issues within the system. Configuration compliance is looking for configuration issues within the system. So in this case, we would use authentication and/or agents and do that through integration with third-party scanners to be able to essentially audit systems for things like on the right, open ports, services, weak passwords, other configuration items, and then map those to the various compliance standards that you care about, which is often going to be 853, 800, 171, and the DISA STIGs. So we have the ability to map to that. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead now and turn it over to my colleague Todd, who's going to demonstrate continuous authorization and monitoring.
Thank you, Scott. So the flow of our conversation is going to follow here today is we will start out at an authorization boundary, see how we can create the boundary, which is essential for continuous monitoring here in CAM, and then jump into an authorization package that is in step 6 in the monitor state and look at how we can perform continuous monitoring with different data throughout the CMDB. Then we will get into continuous monitoring indicators and see how we can monitor those controls for compliance autonomously and look at some reports at the end for how we can quantify all this data. So starting out here in the authorization boundary, we define boundaries 3 ways here in CAM with attributes, diagrams, and system elements. The attributes can be found at the top third of the screen here. The diagrams are uploaded into the middle part of the screen, and then the system elements can be found at the bottom. Like all ServiceNow solutions, the CAM is data that's in the CMDB. So it's records that are data that's in the tables. And if we want to pull in additional fields into these forms to support tracking for metrics, data calls, and reporting, we can definitely do that. It's as easy as adding columns into the table that the form is being pulled from, capturing that data, and then you can use that data for that reporting purposes. The bottom third of the screen here where the system elements are, this can be populated out 2 ways. And we understand that customers are in various stages of their CMDB maturity. Some are getting up and running. Others are more of a mature state with their CMDB. CAM can support either way, regardless of CMDB maturity. The more data that's in the CMDB, the more powerful CAM is. But if you're still getting up and running and populating out tables, you can do an initial upload manually of what the boundary looks like. And then when you get to the point where the CMDB is mature enough to automate the process with boundary filters, that can be done, but it can definitely support the manual upload of data if needed. In addition to the manual way to populate out the system element list, we also use boundary filters. We have one example here, and I'm going to open that up to show the process here. And the boundary filters are basically scheduled jobs. Out of the box, they run every 24 hours, and they will look for data in the CMDB based on a certain filter condition, and then pull those system elements into the authorization boundary or remove them if necessary. This boundary filter right here is it's pointed back to our Windows Server boundary that we just came from. We want to pull in Windows servers from a specific table here. So we have identified the table as the CMDB CI Win Server table where the data resides that we want to filter on. And for the filter condition we have selected here, when we select the table, this filter condition dropdown contains all of the columns that are in the table that we selected. So we can get very granular with how we filter down on the information. In this case, we've selected name. For the operator, we've selected does not contain, and load is the value here. So every 24 hours when this boundary filter runs, it's going to look through the Windows Server table for any system elements that do not have a name that contains load, and it will dynamically bring those system elements into the boundary. There are other options that you can perform here. If you want to pull in data that's in a subnet, you can select IP address, use between as your operator, put the bottom and top ranges of that subnet in the criteria fields, and then pull in that type of information. So you're only limited by the data that you have in the tables as to how you can filter down and pull in those specific system elements. So the inverse of that process of bringing the system elements in is to remove them when the filter job, when the scheduled job runs. If there are system elements that were brought into the boundary from a filter that were not identified the subsequent time the filter ran, then that system element would be removed from the boundary. So, excuse me, we see that as beneficial for 2 reasons. One is compliance, because your documentation will always be up to date within a 24-hour period of time. You'll have an accurate boundary list. So your hardware inventory for your CM controls will be accurate within 24 hours. And security is the other benefit that we see, because when we get to the point of running continuous monitoring indicators against the boundary, they're going to be run against an accurate boundary list. Again, as long as you have the mature CMDB and you're able to leverage this automation based on the data that's in your specific environment, then you'll be able to automate this process and leverage that to the full capability. Once we have the boundary defined, then we'll be able to create an authorization package and take that through the RMF process, get the ATO, and get to the point of continuous monitoring, which is where we are in this package right here. The chevrons across the top of the screen indicate that we are in the monitor step, and we are continuously monitoring these controls to maintain our compliance. The middle of the screen here, the risk summary tab, this contains a lot of information that could have an impact on your ATO, again, granted on the data that's in your specific CMDB. Out of the box, we provide fields for these 4 data points: change requests, IT incidents, security incidents, and vulnerable items, all of which could have an impact on your ATO. In addition to a hard count, we're also pulling in the average risk score of the different records that are identified in this tab. And in addition to the high level data, we also have access based on least privilege and role-based access in the individual environments, but the out-of-the-box capabilities to be able to show these individual records as well. So the ISSO or whoever's working the package, they don't have to email another team, contact another team through messaging chat or request a report. Because CAM is part of the ServiceNow platform, it's accessing this data that's on the platform. All of those in-between steps and the manual workflows are eliminated, and you can have quick and easy access to the records. Again, if permissions permit, including what we're talking about here today, which are these vulnerable items. You can click into these different records and see all the work that's being done on the SecOps side, keep track of the workflows, and make sure that the vulnerabilities will be patched prior to slipping on whatever the patching policy is requiring a POAM to be opened up. So this is a top level look at the different data points that could have an impact on the ATO, but this doesn't delve in specifically into continuous control monitoring of controls. For that, we use indicators. We have 2 examples of indicators that we're going to look through today. One is a manual indicator, and that's for any time somebody actually has to put their eyes on the screen and put their hands on the keyboard. And the other indicator is a basic indicator, which looks at data in the ServiceNow CMDB and automates that monitoring process. For a manual indicator, we've selected the AU6 control right here, or the AU6 control objective. This is the control objective template that controls are generated from when authorization packages are created. And I like to call that out specifically here because this is an area where you can have transparency between all of your different ATO components. So all the data that's contained in your policy plans and procedures, which normally ISSOs and assessors would have to go look in those documents to get that information if they didn't know it by heart, you have an opportunity in CAM here to customize your control language here. So all of those organizationally defined parameters, anything that you find in the brackets. So here we're talking about the frequency or the organizationally defined inappropriate or unusual activity, potential impact. All of those organizationally defined parameters can be included here at your objective template level, which will propagate down to all the controls when they're generated. So that alleviates your team from having to go hunt and search for that information. We have 2 indicator templates configured here to monitor this control for both AEC or AU6A as well as AU6E or C. For A, we need to review and analyze system audit records. And then for C, we have to adjust the audit review based on the findings and the work that's being performed. We'll take a look at the template for AU6A and see how this is configured. So in our organizationally defined parameter here, we have defined that this review needs to take place every quarter. So we have captured that in the indicator template text right here. So every time the indicator is generated, it's going to include this text. And we can also schedule out when this indicator is going to run. Here we've selected quarterly. We also have daily, weekly, monthly, other different collection frequency thresholds. And then we can define when the next run is going to take place. So this takes the guesswork or the Outlook calendar events out of the equation when it comes to tracking these controls. The system is doing the job of generating the record, kicking off the workflow, sending out the notifications to the appropriate control owners or their technical POCs to come in and perform the review. The business end of this, whoever's logged in, Susan Orwell is the control owner that's being monitored for this control right here. They would be able to access the record, upload a screenshot, upload a file, mark the record as complete, and use that actual hard or soft copy as a record that you can use to substantiate that the work is being performed during the next assessment. The next example of an indicator that we'll look at is a basic indicator, and this is going to look at data that's in the ServiceNow CMDB. And for this, we've selected an indicator that's going to scan for active, vulnerable, or critical items older than 15 days, or mediums that are older than 5 days, or mediums that are older than 15 days. We have scoped this indicator back to the RMF application 6, which is the RMF package that we were at earlier. So this is monitoring the RA5 control, or the vulnerability and monitoring scanning control of that package. In the middle of the screen, the configuration area, this is a basic indicator. So it's an automated process that's going to look at data in the ServiceNow CMDB. We have pointed this to the vulnerable item table, where the vulnerability data resides that is being worked in the SecOps solution that Scott's going to talk about here shortly. And these are the supporting data fields that the indicator will look through when it parses the data in this table. The basic criteria here, we have a couple different conditions that need to be met. For the first one, we need to have, is the state of vulnerability in some state of being open? Is it older than 5 days, and does it have a risk rating of critical? Or is the vulnerability in some state of being open? Is it greater than 15 days, and is it medium? Indicators are very flexible. You can have multiple indicators per controls. So you can, for RA5, for example, an indicator can be set up for lows. That's only going to look at findings that are low findings older than 365 days, moderates older than 180, high findings over 30 days, and criticals over 15. So you can have multiple indicators monitoring the same control, performing separate actions. You can roll those into a single indicator if that works better for your organization, and schedule out when this indicator is going to run. So for vulnerability scanning, most agencies are scanning every 72 hours for CDM anyway, so we can set this one for daily. And then the results tab is going to contain the record of the most recent time that the indicator ran and the time prior to that. Every time the indicator runs, there will be a record of it, a historical record here in the related list at the bottom of the screen. And that's also data that you can use for reports. So if you want to track your indicator performance for continuous monitoring over a certain period of time, those are data points that are in the CMDB that reports can be created for. So for this particular indicator that we're scanning for, that we're looking at vulnerability scanning data on, we see that it failed the most recent time, and to see the impact that failed indicator had, we have to go to the actual control that's being monitored. Here we can see that the status of this control is non-compliant, and the reason for that, when we scroll down to the bottom of the screen, we see the connective tissue back to the indicator that we just came from. So our active, vulnerable, critical, or medium findings. We see the far right column here, last result passed is false. That was the driver for making the control non-compliant, as well as opening up a POAM or an issue and assigning that back to the control owner to get the control back into a compliant state. We'll open up one of those issues right now. And this one is currently in the respond step of the workflow across the top of the screen in the chevrons. More connective tissue back to the indicator. Here we're looking at the POAM, but this is showing the indicator source is indicator failure. And we definitely do not want our customers to work for the Department of Redundancy department. So there are enough smarts behind the automation and CAM to where we're not going to open up multiple POAMs per control. If there is an existing POAM for a control, we'll update the issue source if there's a control test or an indicator failure or an attestation self-reported non-compliance. So the system will know enough not to open up redundant POAMs for an individual control. The issue record in CAM is where the corrective action plan will be captured, and the response will also be selected here. The response will determine which type of tasks will be generated for the POAM closure, whether they're remediation tasks or acceptance tasks. They can be tracked down at the bottom of the screen in the related lists. And we still have the concept of milestones, which are separate from tasks. So tasks, they track the actual work that needs to be done, and milestones can track those dates that we need to close and pass through. So if implementing ServiceNow is going to close a POAM finding, then you can still have your procurement, contract award, kickoff meeting for implementation, wrap up meeting for implementation. You can still have those milestones, but we're going to drive the POAM through to closure through the tasks. So we'll do a quick recap now on that process, just to show how we drove that process home. So back at the indicator that we were just looking at, again, that's monitoring that vulnerability data that resides in this vulnerable item table. So all of the work that's done on the SecOps side of getting those vulnerabilities in, normalizing them, getting them in a state that they can be remediated, all that work is being done on the business end within SecOps, and we're monitoring the data that's in that table for compliance. Whenever that data exceeds the thresholds that we put in for our basic criteria, that indicator will fail. The automation will kick in, mark the controls non-compliant, open up a POAM, and assign that back to the control owner. We're able to track all these POAMs and different remediation actions through the dashboards and reports that we provide. In the current interface, this is what the reports look like. And again, this is a forward-looking statement. These are the report page. It looks like we got logged out. I apologize. The release versions of our instances, they log out pretty quick, so it looks like I lost my login. But we are transitioning over to the new UI workspaces in the upcoming release in August, and that will enable CAM to take advantage of all the new reporting capabilities, fewer clicks, cleaner interface, and we're looking forward to that. So that is the POAM process. Quick recap for everything that we discussed. We started out with the authorization boundary, showed how we create the boundary and are able to monitor the boundary with boundary filters to keep the boundary up to date and keep the system element list accurate. So when we do get to the point of monitor in an RMF package, then we're able to pull in all the data related to those system elements, including change requests, IT incidents, security incidents, and of course, vulnerable items. Get those risk scores, have access to the individual records themselves, and then how we can monitor the different controls with continuous monitoring indicators to ensure that they remain in a compliant state. With that, I'm going to stop my screen share and pass it back to Scott for the remainder of the SecOps presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. Okay. Now we will show you how vulnerability response and configuration compliance supports continuous monitoring activities that Todd covered by leveraging automation. We'll quickly start out with step one, which is how you tie your scanning technology into ServiceNow and do the initial configuration. And to facilitate that, we give you a setup assistant. So it allows you to quickly install the application, define your users and groups. It is a scoped application, so you do have the ability to limit who has access to this data outside of everybody else in the platform. The next step would be then to do the configuration of the scanner, and we provide you an easy wizard to kind of walk through entering your configuration. And we do support scanning both that's done in the cloud and when the scanning is deployed on site. We can do that via mid-server. And then lastly, the setup that we talked about, and starting in step two. So really, the first thing is it's going to do the risk calculation. So we'll take a look at that really fast. So we have the ability to leverage the CMDB and other contextual information in the platform to be able to set up the risk calculator. And if my environment will cooperate here, we'll take a look at this. And you can see here that it's as simple as having your different fields that you're monitoring. So whether your CI is exposed to the internet, your EPSS score, the criticality, really any metadata in the risk or CMDB process could be leveraged here in the criteria builder to define this, and then weights, and it's on a scale of 0 to 100. So a very simple way to set up your risk score. You can also do this fairly sophisticated using scripting as well. After you do that, then you might want to then immediately assign all those vulnerabilities. So as vulnerabilities come in, you have an individual record in a table that's going to be one vulnerability on one system, but that's not an easy way to remediate vulnerabilities. But you do need to individually assign all those vulnerabilities, and that's step one here. Step two is then to group those vulnerabilities into categories so that they can be managed in bulk and not have to be managed individually. And that's what the remediation task rules do. And then lastly, the remediation target rules are going to define, based on criteria and business context, when do these vulnerabilities need to be remediated? And that would basically take you through the integration, the prioritization, the assignment, and then the grouping. And then we're going to now pivot to go through the workflow. And as we go through the workflow, we're going to demonstrate this from two different personas. The first persona we're going to use is the vulnerability manager, and the person that's managing the entire effort, working with the risk team on making sure things are getting accomplished. And then we'll also pivot and show you what it looks like from those that are responsible for doing the actual remediation. Before we do that, though, we'll quickly touch on the fact that out of the box, to support the enrichment and the prioritization and the risk scoring and assignment, we give you the NVD database feed. And we have an example of here where I've taken that feed and I've filtered it for CISA-KEV, which is another feed that we take in, so that we have the ability to say, okay, show me all the vulnerabilities with a vulnerability score of 10, which is the most critical, and have a CISA-KEV has sent out an announcement saying that an exploit exists. So that's what you see here. And this might be a good example of either vulnerabilities that you want to track using a watch topic, which I'll cover here in a minute, or a higher priority in terms of a risk score that you might want to assign because of it having such a critical issue that has a working exploit. So again, we provide this out of the box, and we'll also touch on some additional content that we give you all on the way here. Okay, now we're going to pivot into what's called the Vulnerability Manager workspace. This is where the person performing the management of the vulnerability process is going to live and work. And you can see here, you get an initial dashboard. One of the first things I want to call out is the fact that there are different types of vulnerabilities that we can track and manage in vulnerability response. We talked about two of them. The first is host vulnerabilities, which are infrastructure vulnerabilities coming from typically a scanner like Tenable ACAS. Also, it may involve configuration test scan results coming from ACAS, and that's what you have over here. But there's other types of vulnerabilities that we can bring in. We can bring application vulnerabilities, and they may come from DAS scanners, SAS scanners, IaaS scanners. It could come from penetration testing results or SCA scanning. And then lastly, container or cloud-based vulnerabilities in your assets that are specific to the cloud. There are specific scanners out there that focus on that, and we have the ability to bring those in. Now we'll pivot to watch topics. So watch topics in our vernacular are a way for you to have a focused effort on your vulnerability management program. So, vulnerabilities come in, they can be run-of-the-mill day-to-day things that are fixed through an easy patch from Microsoft, maybe not a critical issue. Those are things you just want to automate, get out, get remediated as much as you can and get out of the way. But then you have those critical vulnerabilities, and a great example of this are your critical vulnerabilities in your FSMA boundary. And that might be something that you might want to track here. And you can see we've created a watch topic for that. Creating a watch topic generally is very simple. For example, here's a watch topic we created for Log4j that focused on that. And you can simply do that here. You can either say, I want to do this on an ongoing effort. So as new vulnerabilities come in, they get put into the watch topic, get automatically added to the remediation effort, or doing it as of a point in time. And it's as simple as just kind of clicking through the screen, deciding whether you want to transfer these from another remediation effort, and then saying create. And then that will go ahead and create that. While that's happening, we'll take a look at a few other things here. Let's go ahead and pivot to the critical overdue vuln. So as Todd mentioned, you create your FSMA boundary, you create your indicators, you start your vulnerability scanning. Now you want to kind of connect that back to the indicators. And this allows you to then track and manage, in this case, vulnerabilities that are overdue, that are going to result in indicator failures and POAMs. And it's set up based off of the criteria that you defined. As we kind of drill into that, you can see that, you have overview details. Here's the remediation tasks that go as part of that. But as we kind of go back and look at the watch topic itself, you can see that, it's very powerful. You can see the distinct CIs that are part of this watch topic that are overdue, how many are internet facing versus not, what different class in the CMDB they are, how many unique vulnerabilities they have, which ones have exploits, and then a list of the vulnerable items here. Okay. And as we further drill into the remediation effort here, you can see that this gets into, if you're managing the process, you may possibly be involved in the workflow to do remediation. And we give you that ability within the manager. So notice up here, you have some buttons with some process, and I'll show this here from the IT remediation manager or remediation individual standpoint. But note that they are available to the person managing the process, as well as the ability to then kind of track what's going on with those remediation efforts. So SLAs, preferred solutions, any changes, and ultimately solutions that are available to address the issue. Similarly, we also have the ability to do this for configuration issues. And an example of a watch topic here for configuration issues within the FSMA boundary. And what I'll demonstrate with vulnerabilities works exactly the same with configuration issues, the same process. The only difference is the configuration results go into a different table. And they have a different, record start here, CTR, as opposed to VIT. But essentially, the flow works the same way and the process works the same way. And as we look at these, you can see that this is where you can see a visual tie to IRM and to those control framework citations, policy statements, and such. So for this given test, you can see that these are the citations that it maps to. And then these are the policies internally that it maps to. And you can see that it maps to our internal 853 Rev 4 for Windows policy. These are all the results on individual systems where they failed that particular test, triggering an indicator failure. And then lastly, these are the policy statements that it maps to from a GRC perspective that have been defined. So again, this is the vulnerability manager view. Now let's pivot to somebody doing remediation and take a look at what that looks like. So we have a specific workspace called the IT remediation workspace. And you'll notice here that you have the ability to see for vulnerability tasks that are assigned to you, how many have preferred patches and what are those patches here? So if you've done the integration with patch management, you have the ability to then marry those patches with those vulnerabilities. And it manages things like supersedence within a patch. When a patch is the best option, it replaces another patch. We have the ability to kind of manage that hierarchy within vulnerability response. And then also preferred solutions. This is some other content that we give you. So out of the box, we give you essentially a feed of both Microsoft and Red Hat, and we can take feeds from other tools around solutions for different issues. So again, this helps with the patching and determining what is the appropriate way to remediate this vulnerability, the most efficient way to remediate it. And between the patches and the preferred solutions, we give you the ability to do that. Okay, so let's take a look at the workflow real quick. So again, this vulnerability has been assigned to an individual. It has these particular VITs. It's a group of vulnerabilities. They were grouped for some particular reason. And then these are the different workflow options. So the first one you might want to do is, well, I'm going to go ahead and remediate this manually, and it won't take me very long. So I'm going to go ahead and create a change request to document that I'm going to do that and when. And you'll notice here, this is a first area where you see some huge efficiency gains. This is often a separate system for most folks. So the ability to automatically take some of the information from this vulnerable task and then populate this change request makes it really easy to go ahead and kick off a change request, documenting your plan to fix this issue. The next issue or the next thing you might want to do is schedule a patch. If it's a infrastructure vuln and a patch exists and it's the right way to solve the issue, you can automatically then schedule that patch and push it out. And you can see here, you can pick the patch and then go ahead and anyway, the demo environment's acting a little crazy too today, but you'd be able to pick the patch, select the computer, and go ahead and schedule that. And then the last part of the process, and this is where it ties back to IRM and the POAM, is maybe for whatever reason, you can't immediately resolve the issue. Maybe it's because the vulnerability doesn't exist or the patch or the remediation option doesn't exist. The vendor's still working on it, or you can't apply it for some reason. Maybe it'll impact the system's availability or operations. So in that case, you need to submit an exception or deferral, and that's going to trigger a POAM. And that's where you do that right here. So you go request exception. You can document the reason. In this case, maybe the fix isn't available. Maybe we need to do this for a few months and revisit this. And then maybe, you need to tie in some notes to explain what's going on. So again, this is where it would tie back into IRM, into the POAM, into the indicator, and note that, hey, there's a plan for managing this exception here, and here's what the plan is. There's some additional workflow that's also available. There's a workflow to split the task. There's a workflow to say, hey, this was incorrectly assigned to me. We have the ability to deduplicate vulns, and you can show those. So all, as well as marking things as a false positive. So the last thing I want to touch on is then the ability to kind of measure the overall program And again, out of the box, we give you this overview dashboard here in the Vulnerability Manager workspace, and it has some really nice widgets already pre-created to kind of quickly see at a glance how you're doing with your vulnerabilities and your configuration test results. But we also give you a number of different dashboards. And you can see here, we have things like maybe a compliance dashboard that shows you configuration compliance specifically, unified vulnerability response, CISO, one specifically for application vulnerabilities. So again, a lot of ways to kind of out of the box measure and manage the effectiveness of the vulnerability response program and how you're doing with configuration compliance as it relates to managing your, your indicators and measuring that for your FISMA boundaries. So with that said, that kind of concludes our demo for today, and I'll kick it back to the moderator, and I think we're going to open it up for questions.
Thank you. We do have quite a few questions. First one coming from pretty early on in the presentation. Does this cover ATU as well?
Todd, do you?
Could we get that acronym spelled out? I'm not familiar with ATU.
I'm not familiar with it either.
If you could drop in the chat what ATU stands for, we can go ahead and get that answered, but I'll go ahead and move on to the next one just while we're waiting. Does this accommodate OSCAL, OSCAL?
Yep, I'll get that one. So yes, we do support OSCAL, and we have a roadmap of expanding into additional models as we go on. We can currently export the SSP, and as the different releases progress, we're also going to add in the ability to import and export the SSP, the control catalog, and the POAMs, and then continue to add in the additional models as we go forth. We can. If you'd like to reach out to us, we can schedule a roadmap session if you would like.
Okay, and in the chat, ATU stands for authority to use for our government customer. Okay,
so the options on the ATO verbiage, that's a drop down, and you can have any of the different terminology: authority to connect, IAT, IATT, ATO with conditions. All of those options are available, and however you want to, you can, if you need to configure workflows to accommodate different review and approvals for the ultimate ATO approval, then that can be configured in Flow Designer as well. So you can capture the different ATO statuses that's configurable, and you can accommodate whatever the different review and approval gates are for them.
Okay. And next question, does ServiceNow have ACAS API interface agreement with C5 ISR?
I know what that is. I don't know the answer to that question. I actually personally don't support the Army, but I know that we do a lot with the Army, but we'll have to take that one and get back to you on that. I don't want to answer incorrectly, and I'm not specifically certain if we have the agreement in place or not.
Okay. Will there be an enhancement to add ACLs to those related tables, VR, incident, change, security incidents, etc., to only display records to a CAM stakeholder that is named on a package? Currently, the OOTB grants read-all access to those tables via the ServiceNow IRM continuous auth reader role, but we don't want system owners / SSOs to have access to all vulnerabilities, just the ones that relate to their system.
Yes, the ACLs are configurable. We do have customers that have greatly restricted access to some of the roles to show very limited amounts of data, and enhanced other roles to accommodate other capabilities. So yes, you can modify ACLs to restrict the access that's granted.
Okay. Within a single authorization boundary, if multiple vulnerable items for the same vulnerability exceed the acceptable remediation timeframe, how is that information tracked and grouped?
Yeah, that's one I think that we demonstrated as part of vulnerability response, but essentially, through the criteria builder, you want to essentially set up a criteria that captures that scenario, go ahead and groups those. You might want to create a watch topic to track those and manage those. and assign appropriate time frame based off of that, and trigger escalation maybe through notification. But yeah, that's kind of core functionality within how VR manages through the watch topics, the focused effort for specific vulnerabilities that meet a specific criteria.
Does the application support assess only?
So the assess only packages, they are on the roadmap at this point. They're not in the current offering that we have. It is configurable to modify the workflow to just end the package after the assess step and forego that final ATO authorization, forego step 5. But that would require configuration, but that is on the roadmap to be added in the future.
Can we implement ServiceNow on premise, or do we have to use the cloud model? If we have to use the cloud model, what is the difference between commercial and gov cloud? I noticed that one agency uses a commercial cloud instead of gov cloud. So what are the benefits to use the gov cloud? Thank you.
Well, ServiceNow can definitely be deployed on site as opposed to in the cloud. We have customers that have classified environments and more sensitive areas where they require on-prem deployments. We definitely support that. As far as the differences between gov cloud and the commercial cloud, I would refer you to our field security team for that. They'll be able to provide a more detailed answer and response.
Given an indicator template is associated to a control objective, is there an approval process before an indicator template can be published, resulting in the creation of n number of indicators for n number of control records? The concern being a significant amount of work and/or resources could be committed by the publishing of one indicator template.
Yes, I could see how the indicator explosion could happen there. For creating the indicator, there is not really a review and approval workflow for creating those. That's a workflow that could be put together in Flow Designer to require that review and approval gate prior to deployment.
Okay, and we've got one last one. You mentioned getting a best remediation feed from Microsoft and Red Hat. We get that currently from our scanner. Is there a way to see them side by side?
Yes, absolutely. The Microsoft and Red Hat feeds go into a common table for solutions, and we can also take information from the scanners themselves, solution information, and put it all together so that you probably didn't see it in the quick demo that I did, but in the solution content, you can have content from a scanner and from other sources that you may subscribe to or want to kind of feed into that, and then see that all kind of side by side with a given vulnerability, when you're going to make remediation decisions. So it's definitely possible to do that.
Okay, do we have any more questions? It looks like that may have been our last one. So I can go ahead and close us out. Thank you, everyone. I'd like to thank all of our participants as well as our speakers for being with us today. We hope the information you received during this webinar has been helpful. If you have any further questions or you would like to request more information, please feel free to reach out. Thank you again and have a great day, everyone.